What we'll be looking at now is combining keyframed animations with a procedural animation system. So the system I'm going to use is one that I had from a YouTube video that I showed how to create full step by step. It's also available in the course download project. So if you go to the third person folder, blueprints, you should see BP third person spider. So if I just set in the third person game mode, the pawn, select pawn class, just make sure that's BP third person spider, and when you press play you should be playing as spider guy. So what we'll be doing is first we'll create an animation, some kind of attack animation, and we'll just keyframe that manually, and I'll create a basic rig, show you how to create a basic rig just so we can animate that, and then we'll combine it with the procedural system. So the character's legs can still walk around, but then it will also do an attack animation whilst some of the legs are still procedurally animated. So if you're not familiar with the setup, in the spider tutorial folder there's a proc spider control rig, and just as a reminder, if you've gone through this or if you haven't, basically all of this first section here is calculating where the feet should move to. It's got a timer going, it tells the legs when to move, it triggers the legs, calculates the final outputs for the targets for the legs, moves the pelvis around, and then this set final leg IK is the important one where it actually sets the final positions. So just keep that in mind. And if you've downloaded this and you didn't create it yourself from the YouTube tutorial, then I'd recommend just exploring this and figuring it out, or watch that YouTube tutorial. So first what we need is an animation to use. So to create the animation, I'll create a very basic rig for the same character, the same spider character. We'll animate that in sequencer, then we'll export that, and then we'll start doing what we need to do to make it so we can combine it with the procedural elements. So if you go to the BP third person spider and select our spider, you should see the skeleton that it's using. So we've got the skeletal mesh asset on the right in the details panel. Proc spider sculpted, low poly. If you click the magnifying glass, it should take you to that in the content browser. So this is the skeletal mesh. I'm just going to right click on that and do create control rig. And I'll rename this so I don't get confused. I'll call this proc spider anim rig. Okay, so we'll open up proc spider anim rig. And for now, I'll close this proc spider control rig. That's the actual procedural animation one. So just within the anim rig, and I didn't set the material on the actual character, so he's in green, but that's fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a control for each one of the legs and make the legs target those positions. So then we can just move the controls around in sequencer to animate the spider. And maybe we'll do one for the pelvis. I'm not sure. We'll try without first, and then maybe we'll add one for the pelvis. So the end bones of each one of these legs is the last one in these chains, which ends 004. So we just want to select all of these 004s. So I'm just control clicking on each one of those. And then we've got all of the endpoints for the legs. So if I right click on any of these when I've got them all selected and do new element, new control, we then get these controls created at the position of the feet. And with these selected, so I've just shift selected all of these, we can go into the shape properties in the details panel on the right. And let's just make them a little bit easier to click because they're just little red circles at the moment. I'll use a box thick. And we can scale that up, so I'll just do 2x scale on them all. I might even do box solid, and then that should be a lot easier to click whilst animating. Okay, so we've got these controls. Just compile every now and again, compile save. Now we're just going to set up the simple FBIK to make it so that it targets these positions. So when we move it, the legs actually move. As it is now, these controls are doing nothing. They're not connected to anything. They're not driving anything. So if we move one around, nothing happens. And then when you compile, it should go back to its default spot where it was created. So right click, full body IK. The root is, I forget what I use for this character. I'm pretty sure it's the pelvis. Yep, pelvis. So we want to add effectors, and the effectors are for each leg. We're basically affecting each leg, where we're telling it to target these positions. So we're going to need 8 of those. So just on effectors, add 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. And then each one of these, we need to tell it which bond to use. So I think the easiest way to do that is if we just drag in these controls, do get control, gives us a list of all of them. So it's a badly positioned list, but it should be fine. So each one of these controls is going to be modifying the effector's target, which is this transform, for the corresponding leg. So in this case, it's leg 1, L004. So we want to choose that bond, so leg 1, L004. And if we plug in the transform to the transform, it brings it back into place. And then we just repeat the process. So this is leg 1, R004. Connect the transform. You get the idea, so I'm not going to explain through every step of it. I'll show you doing it. So leg 2. And as you're connecting these, if at any point you start seeing the legs twist or something go weird, you've probably just selected the wrong one. Leg 2R004. And these controls are a bit annoying how they're overlapping, but leg 3L004. Leg 3R004. And the last two, leg 4L004. Leg 4R004. Okay, so when you compile save, you should see everything's just as it was, but if I click on one of these controls, you can see that it's moving the legs around and the character as well. And one thing that we're going to do, and I did do this in the initial setup to avoid weirdness like this, is we use subchains. And earlier in this course, we talked about subchains. The same applies here, where we're going to make it solve based on just a few of the joints, not all of the joints. So it first prioritizes trying to solve for, let's take an example leg. So with this leg, instead of it using the whole chain, including the body, we want it to solve for this bone here, which is like the calf bone, I guess. This one above that. So a chain depth of 3. So it prioritizes solving just with those if possible, and then the rest of the body gets engaged if it has to. So for each one of these, I'm just going to set chain depth to 3. So for all legs. And then to actually make subchains be working in the settings section, you want sub iterations to some non-zero value. I'm using 20. The more iterations, the more accurate it will be. Okay, so now when we move legs around, you should see still motion, the leg still moves, but it's not going as weird as it was before. It's not pulling up this bone when it doesn't have to. It will do if it goes to some extent where it has to start pulling the rest of the body, but as much as it can do, it's just going to try to reach the point by only moving those 3 bones that are in the chain. So this might be enough without the pelvis. I'm thinking that the animation is essentially just going to be 2 of the front legs are just going to lift up. So it'll be like doing something like this. And then maybe one like jabs down or something like that. And the reason I'm doing it with 2 legs will become apparent. I'm just going to show an extra, just some extra information that you can do with the curves and so on. But basically it's just going to be 2 legs raised up at the front. And I've lost that control because I put it under the ground. And I think maybe I will add a pelvis control because the body's raising up when I lift those legs up. And I kind of want it to be a little bit lower than that. So what I'll do is I'll add an extra effector. And I think this, I'm not sure if I want to use the abdomen for this. No, I'll use pelvis. Maybe I do want the abdomen. I'll try it with that. Abdomen in here. And then we need to select the abdomen in the rig hierarchy. New element, new control. Get control, plug that in. Compile. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to undo that. Disconnect the full body IK node. Delete the control. Recreate it so that it actually creates it in the position he's in before we modified it and messed anything up. So new element, new control. Now we're using this abdomen control, which is in the correct spot. Drag that in, get control, pop it in there. And now when we move, need to actually connect the full body IK node up again. Now when we move the front legs, it's kind of being pinned back using that abdomen control. So if we select the abdomen control, we can affect the body like that. We can rotate the abdomen as well. I think maybe the pelvis as well, just for additional control. So I'll disconnect full body IK again, add a new effector. This will be the pelvis. And we search pelvis in here. Right click, new element, new control. Get control, pop that in there. And these controls that I've just created, we can't really see too well, so I will just modify the shape of them as well. So this is the pelvis one, so we can move his body around. Can rotate the body as well, which might be useful, might not. And it keeps the body pinned in place, so when the legs raise up, because it's also trying to solve to reach this spot, it's not moving the body. We can still allow it to move the body and manually make it do that, but it won't be doing it by default. And I'll just get the pelvis control, change the shape. So for this one, I think I'll use box thick, and then just try 4 on the scale. This is underneath the body, the actual position of it, so we can actually see that quite easily. Abdomen, that's another one. Get that control, switch to box thick, 444 on that. Maybe make that one a little bit bigger just so it sticks out. So I'll do 555. Okay, so that should be all we need. We should have enough control to do some basic animation, and we're not going for like Pixar level quality here. It's just to be an example animation and show how that combines with the procedural setup. And just one small change I'm going to make. We've got the control for the abdomen and the pelvis, but they are actually independent. And so you could move one and get weirdness. And you get sort of inverting when you move one behind the other and so on, like that. It goes strange. The abdomen should only move when the pelvis moves. So what I'll do is just select the abdomen here, drag that onto pelvis control. So whenever the pelvis moves, it brings the abdomen control with it. And then compile. Other than that, it should be good enough for just the basic animation we're going to set up. So I'll create a new level, empty, or basic. As we've done before, drop down here, add level sequence, and I'll put this in the spider tutorial folder. So if you've downloaded the course, that's where you'll find it. I've got spider animation, and instead of just dragging in the skeletal mesh to here, like we've done before, we can just drag our proc spider anim rig directly. So I've got the spider there, opened up in sequencer, and now we just need to make a basic animation where it just does an attack. So typically what I do with animating things like this is just make the key pauses first and then sort of fill in the details around it. So let's first create a keyframe for every control at the very start. So go to frame 0, and this is 30 FPS. We might want to change that at some point, but you can change that whenever you want. So at frame 0, just select the proc spider anim rig track and press enter. And that creates a key. You should see a little circle there. A key in all of the channels for each control. And then we'll go to the end of the animation, and let's say that's at frame 90 for now. Again, we'll tweak this. Select this, press enter, and you've got keyframe in all of those channels. And so now, no matter what we do in between, it always starts and ends at the same point. And that will be good for it transitioning in and out of the procedural animation. Whatever's going on with the legs, wherever it's walking to, it's going to transition from that, do the animation, then end up back where it came from. So at frame, let's say 20, I'm going to have the legs raised up. So that's just going to be these front two legs. I'll raise them upwards and bring them towards the center a little bit. And also with that, I'll raise the body up, maybe rotate the body. Maybe rotate the abdomen as well as it raises up. I'll rotate it down, see what that looks like. And then from there to somewhere a few frames later, this is going to be the actual attack where the legs are going to jab forward. So this needs to be quite snappy. So let's say that's 5 frames later at frame 25. We're going to bring the leg down. This is going to be the main one attacking, the right leg. And I'll make sure it's centered. And we can act like it's sort of attacking something that's somewhere near the ground. So just around there. I'll bring the body forward to help out, rotate it, and the abdomen can kind of flick up a bit. This leg also wants to come forwards. This other leg's not actually doing much, it's just for the sake of demonstration really, because we'll be using 2 curves, 1 curve for each leg, just to show you how that actually works. So I'll just play through what we've got so far. Okay, so the leg's not going out as far now when it jabs because we moved the whole body forward, so it kind of looks like it's not really trying to reach far. So let's just move this out further. Okay, so after it actually hits, we're going to hold this position a little bit just to add a bit more impact when it actually is doing the attack part. So we're not going to move the leg too much, but we do want some motion. So just a few frames later, maybe 5 frames later, I'll just keep that leg outstretched. This one's still sort of got momentum moving forward. Maybe the body's still moving forward a bit. And the abdomen's still swinging. And then instead of it just all sort of lerping back to the default position, I'll bring this main leg back, the attacking leg, back in the direction it came from. So it's more like a quick jab, where it jabs in and then sort of pulls back out. I think maybe it's held a bit too long, so I might just cut out that keyframe and see what it looks like. No, I'll bring that back. I'll just undo that. I think I'll just change the timing a bit. So it's holding it for too long, so I'm just going to bring those keyframes in closer. And then the body should reset a little bit. So after it does the jab, the body's just stationary, but we want it to kind of pull the arm back. So I'll bring that back, swing the abdomen back down. That was way too fast for the body. So I'll just shift select those 2 channels and we can just move both of these keyframes out. I think I want this leg to lift up a bit higher when it retracts back. And then I'll get the body to start moving down sooner. Okay, so the body looks weird because it just suddenly starts moving. So I think what I'll do is delete the keyframe before. So that looks okay. There's a few little tweaks I want to make. I don't like how it looks when it raises up with the abdomen. I think this abdomen part needs to be rotated more like that. Maybe the body, we can get a bit more rotation. And I'll make this arm hold its position slightly longer than it is doing. So just around here, I'll just keep it still outstretched. Okay, and then when the legs retract back to where they came from, I'm going to make one leg do it before the other. So I'm going to make this left leg return to where it started from sooner. So in this left leg channel, we're going to copy the end keyframe and bring that sooner, so somewhere around there. And I'll make it so that just before it actually gets back to where it started, it kind of lifts up, so it's just like readjusts and reaches the ground. So it kind of steps where it does the left leg first, and I'll maybe smooth that out. And then the right leg comes down just after. So here's what it's looking like. Okay, so I think that should work for the sake of demonstrating what I'm trying to show anyway. You could do more with this. You could probably do a lot more with like the motion of the pelvis where it actually hits to make it a bit more impactful, like jiggle the pelvis around just at this moment. Maybe I'll do a bit of that. So I think that change to the pelvis there made it look a little bit more impactful, or at least where it pulls it back out. Sort of like if you imagine that the front leg was stuck into something, like it's stuck in some enemy or whatever it's going to be, and it has to use more force to pull it back out. But anyway, I'm not going to go into too much detail of this. So that's the animation we've got, and I'll just bring the end of the range down to frame 90. I'll just save the sequence, and then we'll just export this. So you can select the Proc Spider Sculpted LP, right click, Bake Animation Sequence. I'll keep this in Spider Tutorial section, folder, sorry. I'll call it Spider Front Leg Attack. Export that. As always, just open this up, just click Save just to make sure it's actually saved the asset, and take a look, see if you notice anything wrong with it. Seems fine to me. Okay. Now we'll set up the animation ready for being animated or combined with the procedural system. So now we've got the spider front leg attack animation. What we're going to do is add some curves to it so that we can tell the procedural animation system when to not be modifying certain legs. Because whilst it's in the attack, what we want to do is just use the underlying animation and not try to do any procedural walking on those specific legs, because that'll obviously just go crazy and just mess up the animation entirely. So we need to tell control rig via curves, so we'll be using animation curves to tell it when to be overruling the legs and when not to be. And to do that, and also we're going to play this as a slot animation, just so whenever we trigger it, it's just playing through whatever animation was coming before it. That shouldn't actually matter in this case because it's all we have is a procedural setup. But so I'll just show you in the animation blueprint. All we have is literally just a control rig node, and then it goes to the output. But if you had something else going on that you didn't want to skip over or mess with or anything, if we just put a slot animation going into this, then it will either be the bass pause or it will play the slot animation, which is our animation that we created through that specific slot. So it's like having an animation node here plugged in, but it's going to be a slot that we plug in. That'll become clearer if you're not familiar with slot animations once we get doing it. So what we'll do is find the attack animation sequence that you've exported, right click, and we want to go to create anim montage. Let's create this, so spider front leg attack underscore montage. Open that up, and the first thing we're going to do is give it a slot. So you can see that it's currently called default group.default slot. You can use that, there's no reason not to in this case, but just so you know how slots work. In the anim slot manager, you can do add slot, and if you don't see that, window anim slot manager there. So we'll add a slot and we'll call this front leg attacks, and just make sure that this is set to slot name front leg attacks and save. So now it knows to play this montage through front leg attacks slot. And what we want to do is basically add 2 curves to it, and I'll do one at a time. And the curves are just going to ramp up when, and sometimes you have to just close the montage and reopen it if you change the slots. Sometimes it just isn't playing the animation for whatever reason. What it's going to do is ramp up a curve. Let's just focus on this right leg, the main attacking leg. So from here, we can assume that at this point it's doing the procedural animation, so the legs are moving around procedurally. But then it wants to lift up, so it needs to blend out of whatever it was doing procedurally, wherever the leg was, to here, and now it's fully the animation, jab, and then we start bringing that curve back down to here, where it will be returned to fully the procedural setup. So on the curves at the bottom left, you can click the curves drop down, do add curve, create curve, and I'll call this front right leg. And if you click on the curve drop down again, do edit curve, you can add points to this. And if you've been following the course version of this, then I've been through all this with another animation, so you'll know what I'm doing, but I'm just repeating myself for people who are only seeing this section. So we're going to create some curve to make it so that we can blend away from the procedural setup and then back. So around the start, around here, we'll start blending out. So I'll just right click, add key. And what I'll be doing is positive numbers. So when it goes to 1, that's when it's going to be fully use the animation. When it's at 0, that means fully procedural. So from there to about here, we're just going to have blended out the procedural entirely. So this here, we're going to set to a value of 1. So this is the time and the value. So the curve ramps up, does the attack, and then from around here, we'll start to chill it out and bring it back to the procedural. So then at the very end, it goes back to 0. Okay, so that's for one leg. And then just so that you can see how this would be set up to do both legs, if we go back, so just tab back to this, I'll add a new curve and we'll call it front left leg. Basically the same thing again, edit curve. The timing of this is going to be slightly different, not too much, but I think I might hold it so it's procedural a little bit longer on this one, so we'll just add a key a bit further in. And then that can be a bit more gradual with blending away from it. So this sets to a value of 1. But then, as we say, this foot kind of touches down first. So that will have actually returned back to the procedurally animating a lot quicker. So, you know, whenever it's sort of grounded, we kind of want that leg to be walking. So if the character was moving or rotating, it'd be adjusting procedurally. So at this point, we'll add a key. This will be at 0, but somewhere else I'll just make sure we've got a value of 1. So let's say from this left leg retracts a bit, and then from somewhere around here it can start blending back towards the procedural. So then this one there, set to 0. Okay, so you should see that we've got two curves slightly offset with the timing. We've got the green one for the front right leg and the orange one for the front left leg. And if you select both, you can see both overlap, so you can just see how the timing combines. And you could switch these to auto to make them actually curved. It shouldn't matter for our case, but if you want to, just change to auto and you get actual curves out of it. Yeah, you'd have to mess with the curves, make sure it doesn't go over 1 and whatever, but yep, so that should be fine. So just save that, make sure the asset's saved. Now in the animation blueprint, we want to right click, search for slot. I'll just search slot to default slot. And then we select this node, and we don't want it to be using a default slot. So just go to the details panel on the right, slot name. We don't want that. Search. We don't see it. And the reason for that is we don't actually have the slot like relative to this character, so it doesn't know that that animation has that slot animation. So what we can do is just do add slot, and we'll call it front leg attacks, I think we called it. I am just going to double check that. Yeah, front leg attacks. And then we can set this to front leg attacks group. Sorry, slot. So this front leg attacks gets plugged into the source of control rig, which then modifies things. So everything should be as normal still. But we should be able to play an animation through this. So if we go to our third person blueprint BP third person spider, and I don't know what I was testing there, I've got some mess there, but I'll just do it when left mouse button gets pressed. So left mouse button event. We can do play montage. The skeletal mesh that we want to play the montage on is our character mesh, so just check that's the right mesh. Yeah. Montage to play is going to be spider front leg attack. Now currently it's doing the procedural animation and never overruling it. Oops, I'm at the wrong character. So this won't look great. You can see that it's trying to sort of move and trying to do the attack, but it's still using the procedural system where the legs are still procedurally like going onto the ground. So I'm just holding forward, and then I'm going to do the attack now. You can see it does the attack animation, but because it's still trying to keep the legs grounded and step into the place and stuff, it's not right. But at least we know that the montage is correctly playing. So now all we need to do, we're in control rig, so if we double click on the control rig asset, open up the control rig. All this was just for debugging, and I've got all sorts of crazy mess everywhere, so I'll just ignore that. The only thing that matters is these first string of nodes. This is doing the procedural stuff. This set final leg IK is where it actually sets it. So if you open this up, you'll see the setup is quite similar to what we did when we made the animation rig for the character, where it's just telling these bones to target these positions, except instead of it being controls, we're doing it from this output transforms array, and that is getting set by our procedural setup. So this is calculating where the legs should be, and then passing it through this, and then the full body IK node solves it. But what we want to do is, using our curves, decide not to use these output transforms and just use the default position and not modify it, so that the legs can be lifted up freely based on the animation. So just to demonstrate this in the simplest way possible, on the full body IK node, just for the front legs, the leg 1L and leg 1R, I'm just going to set the strength alpha to 0 for both. And now when we play and click, you can see that those front legs, they're not procedurally animated at all. The legs are just moving around flat. They're not stepping. When we do the animation, you can see it's playing out the animation of these legs. So that's essentially what we'll be doing, except when we use the curve, that means that it can always go back to being procedurally animated like the rest of the legs. So rather than it being just a simple 0, we're going to do right click, get curve value. And we don't have the curve in here. Control rig isn't aware of our curves. So we need to add the curves in the curve container. And as always, I've managed to forget what I called the curves. So I'll just open up the montage again. Front right leg, front left leg. So those are the two curves to add. So curve container. And again, if you don't see that, it's window, curve container. Add curve, front right leg. Then add another one, front left leg. Compile. Front left leg is the top one, so I'll just get the front left leg curve. Now remember, this is the value of 1 when we want it to be fully the animation, and the value of 0 when we want it fully procedural. So it's actually the inverse of what we want for this strength. The strength value of 1 means it's using the output procedurally, and a value of 0 would mean the animation. So we want to invert that. So if you just get a subtract node and just swap the order, so it's 1 minus whatever this curve value is. So if this value is 1, 1 minus 1 makes 0, so it will be 0. If this value is 0, it'll be 1 minus 0, which is still 1. So we've just inverted it, so it's just a 1 minus node. And then plug that into the strength for the leg L. Then we just do the same, but for the front right leg. And that goes into the strength alpha for the front right leg. So what you should see now is that the character moves around procedurally, including the front legs. But when we click, it does our attack animation, and then it goes back to them being procedurally animated. So there's other ways that you could also go about this. The way that we've done it is we've basically told it to just use the default positions or just not use these legs at all during the full body IK node for a short amount of time based on the curves. What you could also do is you could blend between the output transform. You could do an interpolate here between the initial unmodified position, so you could just do get transform, and that'd be whatever position gets passed in to control rig before any modification is made, i.e. the animation we're playing. And you could lerp between this or the unmodified one. So rather than using output transforms, it'd lerp towards using just the initial position as it comes into control rig. Another way to do that would be in the animation blueprint. You could, instead of doing it through a slot animation going into control rig, which then does the legs, you could do it after this, where you would do something like layered blend per bone, where you would say overrule the front 2 legs with this animation, and you could control the weight of that blend based on the curve. So you just do get curve value again. The way I'm doing it now, I think I prefer, because the procedural animation is still taken into account. So just as an example, when the legs are forward like this and the body's moved forward, because it's still solving for all of the legs through the FBIK node, you'd still get some modification to the pelvis whilst the character's moving. So it won't just overrule it completely and play some static animation with the body or the legs. It's still solving it based on the position of all of these legs. So you get the best of both, really. You get the procedural underlying setup, but then you can overrule it for specific bones. But as I say, there's a lot of ways to approach that, so just feel free to play around with it. When it came to editing that last section, I did notice a problem that I hadn't noticed at the time. So if you focus on, let's say, the front left leg whilst it's moving, and I do the attack, you see it does a little jump back into place. It kind of snaps back to its procedural location. And I think the best way to fix that is going to be to do what I was describing. And so rather than me just telling you how to do it, I'm just going to show you doing it. So what we'll do is, instead of using the sort of procedurally decided target, which is this, the output, we'll actually just use the transform of the specific bone. So in this case, leg 1 L004, we'll get the transform of that. And this is the unmodified one as it comes into the rig. So leg 1 L004, we'll do an interpolate node. And you could actually use a spring interp for this, but I'm not going to. We can just use this value directly. We don't need to do 1 minus because the way we're going to have it set up is going to be that it blends like this. So it's going to be from the procedurally positioned version if it's 0. And if it's 1, it'll be using our unmodified version. And it will be solving for that target. So it's slightly different because this is basically overruling this as if that effect doesn't exist. We're just turning the strength down and it's like that effect is not there at all. Whereas doing this, it's solving for it, including the position of where the foot is based on the animation. So it'll also get more precision over the exact position of where it is relative to the character during the attack animation. So if we use this interpolated value, and I'll also do the same method for the right leg as well. So it's this one here. So we'll interpolate between this and get transform. And I know this is all getting a bit overlappy and messy because we've got sort of 2 methods here, but leg 1 R004, that goes into B, and then we use this interpolated result, and we use this curve value for the front right leg to drive that. And these strengths, we can just keep the strength at 1 in both cases. So it all still works as normal stationary, but if moving, you see there's not that immediate jump where the leg snaps back into place. And maybe it looks like it's, I think, maybe gliding on the floor a bit too much. So we can adjust the curve for that. So if we go to our animation, wherever that is, this one. Sorry, not the animation. We want the montage version where we've got the curves. Front left leg is the one I noticed the problem on. What we can do is we can make it sort of revert to the procedural setup a bit sooner. So this we can just shift to the left, and this we shift to the left. And then it sort of should interpolate back to the procedural version during this transition there. And maybe that's not perfect. This is going to be a bit of trial and error. So it's moving, jabs, and then goes back to where it was. Yeah, and I think that looks a lot better. It looks like it's sort of returning to the floor and then carrying on walking. I'll just I'll focus on the right leg, just make sure that's just as good. Yeah, so I think the right leg, it stab and then returns back to where it was. So of the two, that definitely seems like a better approach in this case. There will be situations where the other approach, where you just lower the strength of it, is going to be at least more applicable to certain situations. And remember, you don't just have to modify the strength alpha. You might have situations where you want to modify the rotation alpha. So let's say you want a foot that you're moving procedurally and you're specifically angling the foot, but then you want to go into some animation where it's not using that. You could scale the rotation alpha so it's not controlling the rotation, it just uses the underlying animation's rotation. And you could have a separate curve for that if you want, or it might be the main curve, whatever. It's going to highly depend on what you're doing. So yeah, just keep in mind that you can modify those dynamically. So that about wraps it up. So I hope you've learnt something throughout this course and learnt how to combine procedural techniques with animations and poses. There's a lot of applications for this, and hopefully you've learnt some new things about animation blueprints as well. I don't tend to cover that in my videos because I typically do a lot of things procedurally, and that's the main thing I focus on, doing things entirely in control rig and so on. But the animation blueprint's very useful. That's the typical way that you would animate things. You'd create animations, set up the systems within the animation blueprint and so on. But it's also good to know the other side, the more procedural side, and how to do things dynamically and modify things dynamically. So if you come up with anything interesting, I'd like to see it. So feel free to share anything. I've got the Discord that you should see in the bar below. Or you can message me wherever, tweet it, something, whatever you want. Yeah, so I look forward to seeing what you create. Thanks for watching.